My name is Michael Jordan. I've been working in AI for over 30 years at MIT, the University of California, and most recently INRIA in Paris. I grew up in the U.S., in Kansas and Louisiana, amid the wheat fields and the live oaks. And now here I am, years later, living in Italy. When I was 40, I fell in love with a beautiful woman from Trieste. We got married, and thereafter we lived mostly in the U.S., but spent summers in Trieste. I began to feel an ineffable happiness here. We're not in Kansas anymore. Living in Italy immerses one in both beauty and tragedy. As someone whose thoughts include ruminations on the future of humanity and also the role of technology in shaping our future, I find it important to be in a place where sober thoughts are natural and encouraged. That's certainly true of Trieste. We're not in Silicon Valley anymore.
I'm Barbara Rosario for AI Stories, Lives, Laws and Technologies. And I'm very happy to be in Trieste with Michael Jordan. Michael, you know Trieste quite well and you wanted to do the interview also here in the Old Port. Why?
It's a good question. I thought about it quite a bit. The story I'd like to tell today in our interview has to do with intelligence and the idea that there's not one kind of intelligence, the intelligence of a single human being. The collective itself can be intelligent. We have many kinds of examples of collectives in history, and I think we'll have more going forward with our technology. And so one collective is the one that brings goods into a city. So here we are in the port of Trieste, and it's a very large port. It was the port city of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's the only port city, so it brought in goods from all around the world to feed an empire of people. And so I want to think about the port as kind of the first phase of an intelligent system that's kind of reacting to the outside world, coping with all the difficulties and uncertainty, and allocating the right numbers of things to bring in and the right allocation of resources. And that entity isn't a single person. It was a little bits and pieces of things by all kinds of people that led to something that was very, very functional and is the beginning of an intelligent system. This is a beautiful old port. It's huge. There are kilometers of warehouses, so you really get a sense of the scale of the enterprise. And scale is going to be important in what we're going to be talking about as well. A small economy, a small market, we've seen those, but the idea that we have to have these at ever-increasing scale is really important, and we already see that here.
You said something that really resonates with me. You don't want to make artificial humans, you want to make human welfare better.
That's right. I really don't feel I have a Frankenstein inside of me, and I don't think that's really a good goal for our technology, is to create computer humans. It's not clear what that would help. Whereas building bigger, better systems that are targeted directly for human needs and human welfare will help. And I think that's kind of what technology has done. Something like a search engine is an amazing use of technology. The search engine itself was not intelligent. It just indexed websites. It's arguably not intelligent. But it made all of us more intelligent. Every human being got more intelligent because we have the world's knowledge at our fingertips. And it incentivized us to create further knowledge. Things like Wikipedia and so on were created. And so that's the kind of group collective intelligence that I actually think happened. Artificial intelligence, the buzzword, we haven't been using it for the last 40 years in machine learning. And the buzzword came back, it was originated with John McCarthy in the 50s. And his goal was maybe not an engineering goal of building artificial humans, but just to think about thought in a computer. And I'm totally fine with that. But it's not so clear that it's a good engineering goal. And I'm more allied with Douglas Engelbart, who kind of argued with McCarthy and came a bit later and said the goal of technology, information technology, should be to augment human intelligence and to add to it, not to replace it. And I totally think that's what's happened. And I think actually that's a good goal for going forward. I want to further augment, however, the vision of Engelbart and make it more of an economic one.
AI has been historically concerned with building agents that are human-like, intelligent, and autonomous. But you said that that should not be the most important aspect.
We've started with the port here, and you can imagine data being used in all kinds of ways to make a more intelligent port. But that's only the first part of the story. The next part of the story involves human beings and interacting with them and the transactions among humans and goods. And that includes things not just of commerce, but also healthcare and all sorts of interactions among people, and collectives become particularly interesting there. So in all of that, the idea of autonomy doesn't really resonate with me. It's not very important. And we don't want autonomous self-driving cars. We want federated cars like the air traffic control system that talk among each other. If some kid walked out into a street somewhere, all the cars around that will know, because they're all federated and linked. And so it's the design of that overall system for safety and also flow of the system where we need to be thinking at the level of that. Thinking of the individual car is way too limited of a perspective. But on the other hand, a completely linked system is not really like an economy. We need something that's a bit decentralized to have the degrees of freedom so that it does novel things.
These days, everybody seems to be talking about AI, ChatGPT. You are a world expert in this field, and these are some titles of your recent work. How AI fails us, AI, the revolution hasn't happened yet.
ChatGPT is absolutely fascinating and very interesting. I didn't mean that it's not going to be part of our future. It definitely is. But there are some things that, first of all, it doesn't do all that well, in particular dealing with uncertainty. ChatGPT is not very good at saying, I don't know, or I know, with 30% probability, or hey, it would be good to get extra data, and so on. The kind of things that humans do particularly well. But also, collectives do them particularly well. Again, we're in the port. The port had to cope with all the external uncertainties out in the world. There was a storm, there was a strike, there was, different goods were available in different places at different times. Those are all things they couldn't plan for. They were uncertain. And humans and collectives of humans are particularly good at dealing with uncertainty.
If the ruins of the Austro-Hungarian Empire don't suffice for inspiration, Trieste also provides Roman ruins on the hill that overlooks the city. It's beautiful and peaceful up here. What's the most natural thing to do where the Romans used to do their Roman things? For me, it's to pull out a book, preferably a mathematics book, and use it as a way to trigger some new thinking. Yes, believe it or not, this is relaxing for me, and I do it everywhere, on trains, planes, and even on the beach, to the amusement of my children. Someone once asked me how I spend my time on a typical day. I responded that I spend half of a typical day trying to minimize entropy and the other half trying to maximize entropy. Walking around in a market in the city definitely helps with the latter. The creative disorder of the market is a nice complement to a math book.
We're now in one of Trieste marketplaces, Ponte Rosso. Why did you want to come here?
I wanted to come here because this is really now the second layer of an intelligent system that's providing goods and welfare to people of a city. So here you have the goods that have come into the port being somehow distributed and allocated. And there's a whole other level of algorithm and processing. Here it's much less of a top-down management like in the warehouses. There is another kind of uncertainty too. It's not just the uncertainty of the oceans and the strikes and all that. It's uncertainty of who's going to come to the market and what do they want. And it's complicated in the sense of it leads to complicated behavior. But each individual decision is not so complicated. We don't need super intelligence inside of every individual in the market to have the market do creative, interesting things. So one of the things the market does is find prices. How do they arise? Well, they're learned. So the individuals have to be learning agents, and they learn that yesterday there was too many tomatoes, today I bring fewer tomatoes, and so on. Or we don't think of it as part of AI, but it's very much part of how do you think about an intelligent system. How do simple learning-based agents come together to to develop mechanisms that lead to social welfare. Moreover, this is an adaptive system. So it's adaptive and flexible and robust, and it's lasts for thousands of years. What could be more intelligent than that?
I really like your titles. Here is one very cinematic, Dr. AI, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Economics. Why do you love economics, and how is economics related to AI?
Partly I love it because I learned it more recently in my life. And whenever I see something really deep and interesting and I don't know much about it, I just love the experience. But I also love it because it's a social science and it talks about the principles of markets. Sometimes economics is more descriptive. Here's a market and here's how it works, or here's how it fails and how it could be regulated. Already that's somewhat interesting. But also in economics are principles of designing new markets. And there's where I think it really starts to merge with what we're now calling AI, which is principles for analyzing data, making inferences, coping with uncertainty, and working at scale. Economics also works at scale, and I don't think that's often appreciated because it's so decentralized and the mechanisms involve simple decisions by people without a lot of coordination. That makes it kind of automatically scalable. And in fact, in a small village, it can work in a big city and it can work around the world. So I love that fact about economics, that it has all of those ingredients. And I also love the fact that it is about people at the end of the day. It's about how people interact, and it's how people interact to give value to each other and to build a society. In classical AI, we don't talk about that really at all. We just simply assume that if we build an intelligent agent, somehow it'll make everything better. And economists don't talk that way, and so that's kind of the reason I love their field.
And is this a new type of economics?
Yes, I'd say this is a new type of economics. As I alluded to earlier, the real phenomenon is one of learning agents. And economics has talked about that implicitly and to some degree explicitly, but in statistics and machine learning, that's all we talk about. And in fact, in AI, it's not really so much about intelligence as it is about learning. But now you can also go beyond that and say, if I want to build more new kinds of markets, let's call them artificial markets, what kind of data could I provide to people? So there's a mixture of information and data and learning all together to build the kind of markets that we might envisage in the future, where all kinds of new data could be made available to us.
Economics and statistics and computer science can get fairly abstract, and it's important to get down to earth at times. The whole point of an economy can be boiled down to whether one can obtain good coffee day in and day out.
Buonasera, professor Jordan.
Buonasera signora, io prenderei il solito caffè.
In grano sempre?
In grano, certo, grazie.
Sempre fresco. Sì, sì, ecco. Grazie. Ecco,
La ringrazio,
grazie.
alla prossima.
Alla prossima, buonasera professore.
In Trieste, coffee goes together with books and with authors. One of my favorite cafes in Trieste is the Cafe San Marco, which saw the likes of James Joyce and Italo Svevo. I used to come here while working on a book that I didn't finish. But it's never too late.
You wrote a paper with some economists in which you write that the problematic focus of current AI is slowing productivity and growth, eroding the possibility of shared democratic institutions, and then these effects are likely to exponentiate. These are strong and worrisome statements.
I think they should be a cause for worry. People are living their lives on the internet. It's not just they're being entertained by it, they're creating things on the internet. They're creating art, they're writing their novel, they're writing songs. One of the big problems with current AI is that there's no business model really for it. There's no thought about the economic model. And so you have something like ChatGPT simply aggregating all of the writings of everyone who wrote in Wikipedia. And now you will see people actually going to ChatGPT to ask a question and getting an answer that's really coming from Wikipedia or similar sources. And so the people who did the Wikipedia effort, who did it without pay, just because they wanted to be involved in something beautiful and collective, are now seeing someone else making money off of it and taking it and running with it, and it was their creative work. So there are definitely people that are outraged by this. If you're doing something valuable, that should be a job there, and you should be able to have your work valued. And we just don't have the mechanisms for that or the thought process in place to think about that. People building the technology should be thinking about that. If they're not, they're doing a disservice to humanity with the technology they're producing.
Much of the dialogue on current AI focuses on issues of privacy, ethics, and fairness. What is your perspective on these issues?
There's a huge gap between the people just developing the technology and the people talking about ethics in the language of, say, moral philosophy. There's a whole range of people in between whose voices need to be heard. I've been emphasizing economists, because if you don't build a good economic system, it's not going to be fair. If you don't build a system that allows privacy to be traded off against other needs, it's not going to be one that people will really want to use. In fact, privacy is a very good example. It's not 0-1. I have privacy or I don't. The system assures it or it doesn't. It's really something I want to have control over. If you want my genome, something very private to me, it's not that I'm going to say yes or no absolutely. I'm going to say, well, depending on what you want to use it for. If you're a doctor wanting to study a disease running in my family, I'm pretty happy to give you my genome. If you're using it simply to sell me something, I'll say no. I have a knob I can turn that gives me access and control over the privacy. It's my own personal decision. And so it's not some law or some regulation that should tell me what to do with privacy. And it's not some technological system that will solve it for me. So that becomes an economic concept because it's a trade-off. It'll trade off against other needs I have in the moment. And in fact, if everyone is their price, if you offer me $1 million for my genome, I might just give it to you. And all of us do this kind of thing all the time in human society. If our systems don't recognize that it's part of a system of trade-offs, which involves, in fact, economic considerations, access, availability, resources, allocations, all the things for which there's scarcity in the real world, then we're not going to be able to actually have a good system. And so, computer science often grew up with the idea there's no scarcity. You can make as many bits as you want, but in the real world, there's always scarcity. Not 10 of us can't go through the door at the same time. We can't go to the same restaurant at the same time as there's 5,000 of us. And our current thinking about AI does not take into account scarcity and then the human needs and values as part of the scarcity. So for me, it's critical that you approach all of this as an engineering, economics, data, uncertainty, field that takes all of human values into account.
Grazie Michael, è stato molto interessante.
È stato un piacere.
Here's what I'd like to do at the end of a long day. I'll let the listener be the judge as to whether I'm minimizing or maximizing entropy right now. Clearly, technology has been and will continue to be a way in which humans are able to grow both their numbers and their aspirations. But the current dialogue over humanity's most recent technological advance is not helping with sober contemplation of the challenges. There's too much magical thinking around superintelligence and too much alarmist reaction. Italian life does not permit an overindulgence in such thoughts. Here we are in Piazza Unità in Trieste, which has seen its share of history's villains, but they are gone. And what remains and inspires is the beauty of the buildings and the laughter of the children. It is such a comfort to have architecture and cobblestones and coffee remind one on a daily basis that humans do eventually get a lot of things right.